welcome to another conversation in the Wounded Angel Network series, and we're going to speak about loss. If you are human, then you will experience loss. It is part of the human condition. We acquire something, we get something, we accept something, we are given something, and then at some point that person, that thing, that possession, that relationship goes away. That is to experience loss. In Buddhist communities around the world, there is a chant that is done very often that has within it a line that goes like this: all that I have, beloved and pleasing, will become otherwise, will be taken from me. All that I have, beloved and pleasing, will become otherwise, will be taken from me. And of course that references the very strong emphasis in Buddhism of impermanence. And it's not just the Buddhists who understand that. I mean, in Christian hymnals, we sing that beautiful hymn, Abide with Me, and there's that line, change and decay in all around I see. O thou who changest not, abide with me, remain with me. And the acknowledgement that everything else is going to change, and so the Christian soul cries out and says, well, for God's sake let God not change, or for my sake let God not change. So loss is a universal human experience. The word loss in English comes from an interesting root. It appears in Old English as loss with just one S, L-O-S. And in Old English it meant ruin and destruction. And the Old English in fact comes from a Proto-Germanic root of lausa, which means to loosen or to divide or to cut apart. And so although the English word loss is in modern usage a lot gentler, if you've ever experienced loss, you will know that it means, it feels like that original Old English meaning of ruin and destruction. If you've ever suffered a significant loss, you will know the feeling of being ruined, of being destroyed, of being gutted, of being desolate, of being burnt out. Loss is a very, very powerful human experience. And when that loss happens very early on in life, it can be quite devastating for the rest of our lives. A child who has the loss of the love it requires from a parent, a child who is not fulfilled in its needs by the absence, either psychological absence or physical absence of a parent, can be deeply wounded for the rest of their life and have to work with that wound. But loss at any time of our life affects us deeply, and there are a variety of ways in which we can respond to loss. Some of them are not helpful, and I want to begin by looking at those, and then at the end we'll look at perhaps some more helpful ways of looking at loss. I mentioned how the loss that a child can experience very early on can actually lead to a tear in the very psychological fabric of that child, and that's often referred to as dissociation, where the child literally splits off and breaks, the ego breaks up And if you've studied any object relations theory, you'll know that there are these different parts that are created in that torn fragment because of the tear of loss. But dissociation doesn't have to be that primal or that deep. There's often dissociation from a loss simply by blanking it out and almost going into a sort of la-la state, partly through shock, and sometimes just as a way of protecting oneself from the shock of the loss. And so one very often has a feeling of things being a little bit hazy, and you feel almost as if you're in a trance. In this, when you first begin to experience this loss, has it actually happened? So one of the forms of dissociation that is perhaps better known is the response of denial. It's a form of dissociation. It's the way we cope with loss, and we say, well, the mind almost refuses to accept. And so denial is a way of going, well, maybe it hasn't happened. People who have lost loved ones, particularly where the loss has been sudden and tragic, like in an accident or through a very instantaneous death, will say that there's the longest time that the mind refuses to accept that it's happened, and they expect the person to walk through the door, they expect to come home and find the person there, and only after a moment or two they realize, oh, that's not going to happen. So that's denial. It's not necessarily something one chooses to do. It's often just a gut, natural response to loss. It's the way the mind protects itself, the way I protect myself, you protect yourself against this deep, profound loss. Some people stay in denial forever. I think there's a whole area of spirituality where I've kept my mind open with people who want to contact those who have died. And I don't want to comment about people who channel the dead, people who communicate with the dead. I really don't want to comment about that. I do want to say, though, that I understand how for some people that becomes very important. And it is a form of denial, I suppose. It's a way of saying, if I can just hear something from the other side, then I'll know they're okay. And I have known people to be tremendously helped by that kind of communication. So whatever your worldview is about what happens after we die, I think psychologically we can understand the need for people to have some kind of assurance that everything's okay, particularly where the loss has been that of a relationship, of a loved one. Of course, that's not the only loss we're talking about here. We're talking about all kinds of losses: physical loss, the loss of a limb, amputation, the loss of cognitive ability, when one realizes as you get older, and those of us who are parenting our parents watch how frail they become, and you just witness the loss every day as you see them diminishing in terms of their faculties. So all these things are losses, and all the things that I'm describing are ways that we can try to cope with it. So there's dissociation. Denial is a form of dissociation. It hasn't happened, or it isn't happening. Another way of dealing with loss that, again, perhaps is not that helpful, but it's something that we do, and that's called numbing. We actually don't want to feel the intensity and the pain of the loss that we are experiencing, and so we just want to switch it off, maybe just for a little while. And that accounts for the very high incidence in our culture globally of alcohol and drug abuse. Who can blame people who just want to feel a little better for a little while? Now, of course, I'm not advocating for drug and alcohol abuse, because that sets up its own problems, because eventually one becomes dependent on the substance and you need more and more of it, and addiction is something we'll speak about at another day. But I've been tremendously helped by a man called Gabor Mate, and I'll reference his name in the notes on this video. But Gabor Mate talks about, don't say why the addiction, ask what is the pain that the addiction is trying to stop. Ask why the pain that the addiction is trying to stop. And so numbing is a way we try to stop ourselves from feeling the intensity of the loss that we have experienced. Is it helpful? Well, let's not comment about that or judge it. Is it understandable? Hell yes. Of course it's understandable. People who are feeling such intensity of pain would want to stop it, even if just for a little while. So numbing is another one of the less helpful approaches to loss. Of course, another strategy that the mind will sometimes employ to deal with loss is to blame the loss on something. Now sometimes there is a causal link that that you can say this loss was caused by that. Whether it's the loss of innocence through a violation like war or rape, crime, there's a clear causal link. But sometimes loss, for example, the loss of one's faculties through age, can you blame anybody for that? That the loss of a relationship, very often we demonize the person who we have lost just so that we can cope. So I'm always interested how when I'm speaking to people who have lost a relationship, how most of their partners, they will always say, oh, you do know they were narcissistic and bipolar. And so the blame, we've got to find a label and stick a label on them and blame them as a way of coping with our loss. I think that's why we created the idea of a devil or Satan, some external agency where we don't have to take any responsibility for the loss. So often it's less than helpful just to put all the blame on some external agency. For example, if a person has diabetes and that's diagnosed and it's treatable through medication, chronic medication, and that person does not obey the protocols, does not take the diabetic medication, continues to consume sugars, does not adjust their diet, and then as a result of that suffers the loss of their eyesight, for example, or needs an amputation. Those two things often happen in extreme forms of diabetes. Who's to blame? Is it the diabetes? Is it the devil? Is it this terrible thing? Or is there some responsibility for me not having taken account of the fact that I'm diabetic and need to change my lifestyle? So blaming is very often too easy, too simple a solution to explain away a loss. And I think we need to work just a little bit harder at being self-reflective. What did I do to contribute to the loss? If anything, but maybe significantly so, maybe I did. If I've lost a relationship, what was my part in this relationship failing? that for me is a mature approach. And so we shift now from perhaps the less than helpful disassociations, denial, numbing, blaming, to look at two aspects of dealing with loss that are difficult but might be helpful. And so if you're dealing with loss right now, one of the considerations might be that rather than numbing, you allow yourself to actually feel the intensity in the moment right now of that loss, almost as a way of reverencing and honoring that which has been lost. Because if it wasn't worth anything, you wouldn't feel anything. Can I say that again? If it wasn't worth anything, you would not feel anything. But the fact that this loss is felt so profoundly and is so strong and is so painful, those feelings are almost a form of prayer, of praise, of honoring the depth of attachment that one had to this thing that has been lost, and to feel the feelings of loss and not numb them or deny them or blame somebody else for them can be quite a creative way of working with the loss. Of wow, sure, that I was really attached to this person, I really loved this person, I really did not want to lose this relationship. So feeling the feeling in the moment of loss and in the moments after the loss can always be quite helpful and healing. And then the final one is probably not something, if you're going through loss right now, that you want to hear from me, but I'm going to say it anyway. Sometimes, and not immediately, after some time, one can look back on a loss and actually celebrate it. And I need to be very careful here, because I'm walking on, and I don't want to hurt anybody. So there are some losses that one never recovers from. The loss of a child, the loss of a loved one. There's some things you never get over. But often there are other losses, perhaps smaller ones, perhaps more psychological ones than relational, physical ones. But there is something about looking back at a loss and being able to celebrate that loss in the way that a plant will celebrate pruning. And I've, in my own life, and often with people I've been in conversation with, been amazed at how after the pain of the loss and going through all the agony of feeling the loss and perhaps the denying and the blaming and the numbing and the dissociation, to come to a point where the person says, you know what, I'm actually better now because of that loss. I'm stronger now, I have insights and understanding into myself and into the world, and perhaps I'm a deeper, wiser person because of the loss. Like the fruit tree that is pruned, and the pruning is painful, but the fruiting and abundance that comes in the next season because of that pruning can often be quite profound. So sometimes, not all losses are negative. Sometimes we profit from some of our losses. They bring new life. They bring depth. And so whatever the loss is that you are reflecting on as you listen to this, or experiencing right now, my wish for you is that you will profit from this loss. And may I remind you, if you ever want to be in touch with me one-on-one, please email me. The details will come up at the end of the video. Thank you once again for your attention and for your support. Please subscribe to the channel on YouTube and you'll get the next videos as they are released. You can also find me on thelisteninghermit.com, thelisteninghermit.com. I'm Peter Woods. Thank you for your attention.